Okay, so we left off with Belgium, King Leopold, and that question of what's going to go on with the rest of Africa. And so that's also going to be a question as it pertains to Britain's control of Egypt. Now, remember, all of these people for the scramble for Africa, all of these nations have come in and they've drawn up all of these lines and they put people together that hate each other. And drawn these lines and formed these new countries. Like, they're like, I'm not a Ugandan. Like, I don't get along with these people. And so we're going to see some people leave. We're going to see that in Uganda, because you put people together that don't like each other, or the Hutus and the Tutsis have problems. Probably in your lifetime, you've even recognized some news there. And so this scramble for Africa is going to raise questions, and we're going to address that now. So Britain's control of Egypt in 1883 is going to become this model for new imperialism, how nations should come in and do this. And so we have in Egypt, the Turkish general Muhammad Ali had made Egypt into a strong and virtually independent or autonomous state by 1849. But in 1863, they're going to try to westernize, and they're going to borrow all this money which they are not able to pay back. And so Egypt's inability to satisfy foreign investors will lead to its control, or control of its finances, by France and Britain. Remember, that feeds right into the "we're better than you, paternal, you're the child, we need to take care of you" kind of situation from social Darwinism we have going on. And so in 1875, Britain is going to buy a significant portion of shares for the Suez Canal and begin managing it. And they buy these shares from France. Remember Lesseps, and the Suez Canal building, and then, the problems that France ran into with the Panama Canal. But Britain is going to be very interested in the Suez Canal, and this is going to prompt a lot of this. So in 1883, Britain declared Egypt a proctorate, which means an autonomous territory protected by a third party, which is going to be Britain. But this Egypt is then going to have an obligation to Britain, so they're protecting it. They're a protectorate, and this is going to set the stage for similar practices by other European powers, which is why Egypt, if you saw this question, would be considered, under Britain's protection, the model for new imperialism. And so mainly they're wanting protection of the Suez Canal. That's the key motive of the British, in their occupation of Egypt and its bloody conquest of the Sudan, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, which is south of Egypt. So Britain is going to claim that the proctorate would only be temporary, because technically Egypt was still part of the Ottoman Empire, but Britain actually controlled the country, because Egypt is a protectorate of Britain now, because they couldn't pay back their debts as they tried to westernize. And Egypt is actually going to remain a protectorate of Great Britain, all the way up until 1956. And one of the main reasons for this, the Suez Canal, is going to give them that shortcut. And so Suez Canal, if you were asked a question about what the key motive of the British is, in Egypt, is going to be the Suez Canal, because they want a shortcut to their jewel of the empire, which is India, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit as well. So you need to know Egypt was a proctorate of the British from 1883 until 1956. And so this is going to further raise that question: who gets what in Africa? And the main reason they want to set some boundaries on this is because if you start to fight over places in Africa, that's going to cause war on the continent. Okay, so here's just a map kind of looking over what we just talked about. So you have the Suez Canal up here, so the Mediterranean, which the British considered their lake, and then the shortcut that it's going to provide them with, some of the trading stations they set up to their jewel of the crown, which is India, which we're going to get to in just a minute. But we need to talk about what is set up to establish the rules, air quotes there, the rules for the conquest of Africa. And so where these quote-unquote rules are going to be established is at the Berlin Conference from 1884 to 1885. Remember, do not get this confused with the Congress of Berlin. We've already had this. So this is the Berlin Conference. So we have everybody meeting, except for whom you can probably guess. The Africans do not get a say in this. And so this is the answer to how are we going to divvy all of this up. The provisions of the Berlin Conference are that no imperial power could claim a territory in Africa unless it effectively controlled that territory, meaning if you don't have the manpower or the militia to protect it, then you can't hold it. It's going to seek to prevent international conflicts between European nations over the issues of imperialism. So they don't want a controversy here to spark a war on the continent. It is sponsored, the Berlin Conference, by German Chancellor Bismarck and Jules Ferry, who sought to prevent conflict over imperialism by mediating this conference. This conference will coincide with Germany's rise as an imperial power and its desire to play Britain and France off of each other. So Germany's united now, and they're going to play with those old, anger, those old battle wounds between France and Britain, trying to play them off of each other so that they can swoop in and come and get some parts of Africa. As a result of this conference, you could say the scramble for Africa was on, like game on. It is legitimized now by this conference, and we're going to see all of these imperial nations flooding in. And so we're going to start with the British, where we left off with their conquest of Africa. We're going to see them moving southward. And so Britain is going to consider themselves, or pride themselves, of course, on being the most enlightened. I guess you could replace that word with the synonym nice of the imperialist powers, although we're going to see that they are still, their rule is still considered to be oppressive. They took control of Egypt in 1883, as we talked about in the Proctorate, and now we're going to move south into the Sudan. And so this is going to give us the Battle of Omdurman in 1898, where General Horatio H. Kitchener, it's always Horatio for the British, right, defeated the Sudanese tribesmen and will end up killing 11,000 of them with machine guns. Because why are these imperial powers able to come in and swoop up Africa? They got guns. While only 28 Britons will die. So 11,000 Sudanese tribesmen will be killed to 28 Britons. 15,000 Sudanese tribesmen will be wounded, and 5,000 will be taken prisoner. And so remember, this is like that chauvinistic jingoism, like just like that poem, like we got the guns, we got the men, we got the money, and we're coming in. So we're also going to see an incident happen here in 1898, of which the Berlin Conference was trying to prevent. France and Britain are nearly going to go to war over the Sudan. They get there like at the same time. And remember those rules, and you can see the movement here on the map, that whoever gets there and can hold it can have it. And so they kind of get there at the same time. And so they're nearly going to go to war, but France is going to back down, partly because at the same time, as we talked about in an earlier lecture, it's in the midst of the Dreyfus affair, and so the Third Republic is having some problems here, dealing with, the corruption and the deceit in the Dreyfus affair. And so as the British continue to move south, we're going to see the British move into South Africa, and this is going to be the Boer War of 1899 to 1902. So what has happened in this time frame is Cecil Rhodes has become the Prime Minister of Britain, not Prime Minister of Britain, but Prime Minister of Cape Colony, a colony in South Africa. So here, and if you remember from our earlier history lectures, originally Dutch settlers have been here in this Cape, like setting up for trade ships to be able to dock here. And so now it's their descendants that are living there, and they're going to start being pushed out by the British. So Boers actually translates to mean Dutch farmer. And so it's going to be the new British coming in versus the Dutch farmers. And so Cecil Rhodes is going to be the principal sponsor of the Cape to Cairo dream. He wants to rule from South America all the way to Cairo, and wants Britain to dominate the African continent, or to straddle the continent. So this next visual is one that you are going to need to know. And so here's a very famous visual of what the Cape to Cairo dream looks like. So political cartoon of Cecil Rhodes, and you can see this is him wanting to really straddle Africa all the way from the south, from the Cape, all the way across the continent. And so if you see this image, you need to be able to say this is, the British wanting to dominate. This is the Cape to Cairo dream, to be able to straddle the continent, and Cecil Rhodes, who's now the Prime Minister of Cape Colony in South Africa. And so what happens next is diamonds and gold are going to be discovered in the Transvaal region, and Cecil Rhodes wants to extend his influence there, but the Boers control that region, the Dutch farmers, the descendants of the white Dutch settlers that have been there for quite some time. And these Boers are actually going to be able to initially successfully repel the British troops, so the Dutch are winning. But we're going to have something a little funny happen concerning Kaiser Wilhelm II. And so what's going to happen is we're going to have this telegram sent, and it's called the Kruger telegram. It's sent in 1902. So Kaiser Wilhelm II, remember, he's our German ruler with the withered arm. He's always wearing like all the military suits and like obsessed with swords, we talked about. And so he's going to dispatch a telegram to the Boers, the Dutch farmers, congratulating them on defeating British invaders without the need of German assistance. And this telegram doesn't just stay with the Boers. Like, word gets out, and this is spreading like wildfire. And anger at Germany is going to sweep through Britain. And so we're going to see smashed windows of German-owned shops. And Queen Victoria, who we study, who's still ruling, I know she's like been there forever, is going to write Kaiser Wilhelm, who is her grandson. She's going to write, so it's a grandma, she's going to write him a letter demanding that he apologize. And so he is actually basically going to apologize and say that, my telegram was misinterpreted. That's not how I meant. I mean, can you imagine your grandma sends you this telegram? She's Queen Victoria because she's related to everyone in Europe, which you're going to see in a minute. And we've talked about this. And so he's going to apologize, and it's going to kind of quell the anger. But we're going to see this Anglo-German rivalry that is caused by this telegram. I mean, they hold on to some grudges here. Rivalry up into World War I. If you remember, as well as if Queen Victoria being related to everyone, we just talked about one of her relative, Alexei, who was Nicholas's son, who had hemophilia, and that came from Queen Victoria because she, as I said, is related to everyone in Europe. So I'm going to get to a family tree here really quick so you can see. So here's Queen Victoria and all of her graceful stages, and then you're going to see here's her family tree. And so she pretty much marries all of her kids off into all of this royalty, and so they're intermarrying. We have Nicholas, we have Wilhelm, so pretty much one matriarch of all of Europe at this time. But it is this hemophilia that comes down and into the Romanov family. And so you would probably, even if it wasn't your favorite grandma, listen to what she has to say. But as a result, the massive British force will eventually defeat the Boers after this has been squashed with the Kruger telegram. And in 1910, the Transvaal, the Orange Free State, Cape Colony, and Natal will be combined to form the Union of South Africa. And then by 1890, Britain will also control Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, and Zanzibar. So this is that Cape to Cairo dream. It's being accomplished under Cecil Rhodes here. And Germany is actually going to recognize British control of these regions in return, because nothing's for free, for British recognition of German control of an island naval station in the North Sea. So they agreed to recognize this as long as Britain's going to recognize them. And so I'll move you to a map here. So you can kind of see how Africa's shaping up here. Belgium, British in kind of this pinkish color. We have the French in green. We have Germany. The Italians, which we're gonna, we talked about some of their failure, preemptively foreshadowing Ethiopia, and then the Portuguese, who have kind of held some stuff here too. So this is how Africa's shaping up with the scramble, and then we're going to be moving through some others, but it's going to go pretty quickly. Like I said, a lot of this is more world history than European history, but just to kind of let you know what's going on with the imperial powers. So now we have the French Empire in Africa. So they're going to actually hold the most land, as you just saw from that map. This is just a smaller version of it here on this slide. Hold the most land in Africa, but it's not really what you consider the really good stuff. Since 1830, they've controlled Algeria. We're going to see Tunisia justify their annexation. The French have in 1881 of Tunisia, and it becomes a French protectorate, just like Egypt was to the British. The French are going to control the northern Congo Basin. It will be recognized at the Berlin Conference. Somaliland, which is modern-day Somalia, gave France territory on the east African coast. Madagascar will be seized by France in 1896, and then France will control the French West Africa, including the Ivory Coast and the Sahara. And the British are going to recognize these claims in return for French recognition of British control of Egypt and the Sudan. So remember, that is if you can hold it, if you're already there. So they're just saying, okay, the Berlin Conference set this up, you got to follow the rules. And then by 1914, France will control most of Morocco. And so with Germany, we talked about, since Germany wasn't unified until 1871, it was late to the imperialistic game compared to Britain and France. Prior to 1884, Bismarck had not been very interested in colonialism, as he was actually more concerned about dangers posed by Russia to his east and France to his west. So he's more worried about at home than he is becoming very imperialistic. But remember, the Berlin Conference had been organized by Bismarck and Jules Ferry to provide for a more orderly conquest of Africa. And he did this because he wanted to guarantee that Germany would now be a major player in Africa, and the Berlin Conference is going to allow Germany to kind of squeeze in, especially if he can keep France and Britain kind of going at each other. So Germany is thus going to set out at this time period to establish a number of small protectorates, like we saw on the map, in Africa. So by World War I, Germany is going to control territory in Africa 5 times larger than Germany itself, so kind of like Belgium. You're able to protect it, though, because you got those guns. So in 1884, Germany will take control of Cameroon and Togoland in West Africa. In 1885, Germany will formally claim Tanganyika, which was renamed German East Africa, which was on that big map earlier. And this will be easily done since German businessmen had already dominated the region. And then we're going to see Southwest Africa will also come under German control, and we're going to see that the German control is also particularly brutal, as a local rebellion will result in Germans killing over 50,000 men, women, and children. So, not quite as much as the 10 million that Belgium did in the Congo, but still very brutal. And so next we want to turn our attention to the other unifying nation, Italy. And so Italy's going to be our last to imperialize because they're all busy, Garibalding it up and trying to unify and bring Italy together. But they are going to get Eritrea on the Red Sea becomes Italy's first colony in Africa in the 1880s, and in 1896 the Italian forces, as I kind of foreshadow, will be defeated. So they're going to be really the only ones that face a big defeat, trying to take Ethiopia. It's like an epic fail. They are the first, how would you like to be the first European country that isn't successful in Africa? The first European country to suffer a defeat by Africans, the only one. 6,000 Italian troops will be killed and thousands taken prisoner in this attempt to take Ethiopia. And Mussolini is going to seek to rectify this humiliating defeat by conquering Ethiopia in 1935. So the Italians will be back, but at this time they're the first to be unsuccessful. Libya will be taken from the Turks by the Italians in 1912. And so really Italy, last of the plate, not, great right out on the track, but they will be back. We'll see this as we move on. And then finally, last of our new imperialism in Africa before we move to Asia, Portugal will control Angola and Southwest Africa and force the people there to accept what amounted to pretty much slavery. So we don't really, so much for that patriarchal we're your father thing. A lot of it turns, pretty icky, and we're going to see that as we move forward. And so next task is going to be moving into new imperialism in Asia. Okay, so we've seen Africa, now we're going to move into Asia, new imperialism in Asia. This is going to be pretty quick because this is AP Euro, and the test right now hasn't changed. It's going to be changing in the next year, but this is not going to be as much on the AP exam, but you probably need to know some events or, kind of in a global context what's going on. And so we're going to talk again, we're going to start with Britain because they've kind of got the imperialistic power that is pushing their foot everywhere. So what starts happening here as Britain has to do with China is Britain has India, which is the jewel in its crown, and it's going to start growing opium, and it's going to grow this opium and want to ship it to China. So they kind of become like the drug dealers to China. They're wanting something that they can sell and make money because we're going to see in a minute the Chinese have all of these goods they're sending out, but they aren't wanting things to come in. And so the British are like, no, we need to be able to make some money here. And so by 1838, we're going to see 40,000 chests of opium coming in, and each chest is 133 pounds of opium per chest. And this is going to equal 57% of the total imports coming in to China. And so we're going to see that this is the British's reaction to China getting all this money by selling their stuff, but Europeans not getting to sell them anything. And so the British are going to go, what can we sell them? Well, let's sell them some drugs. And we're going to see that the Chinese are going to very quickly get fed up with this and make it illegal to sell opium in China after 1729. But as you can say, I was talking about 1838, so that is not going to stop. But let's talk about why the Chinese really don't want opium, and nevertheless the drug fact, but also because of not wanting Western ideas or goods to come. And so like I said, at this time period, feudal China was afraid of new ideas, especially the new military hardware that would come from outside. They don't want any of that in the hands of the wrong people. So China is going to sell lots of goods to England, to the British, like silk, tea, porcelain, textiles, and other manufactured goods, but the Chinese weren't interested in buying English goods, and this does not, we know what the English want to do. They want to sell, sell, sell. So Britain wasn't happy about this business setup, and like I said, everything they bought had to be paid for in hard cash. So they thought of opium, and this is going to, be the big push of opium selling from Britain to China. So as you can see from this picture here, this is not what the Chinese want their people doing. They do not want opium in their country, and so they make it illegal, and this is going to cause two wars in China, also called the Sino, which is the word for China, Sino-British War. So Chinese versus British is going to equal two wars. the First Opium and Second Opium War, and a couple of events in between that we're going to talk about. So as I said, 57% of Chinese total imports are going to be opium, and they've made it illegal, and that's not stopping it. And so what they're going to do is they're going to take 20,000 chests, and remember there's 133 pounds of opium per chest. They're going to seize them and burn them, and this is going to spark the First Opium War. So in the First Opium War, 1839 to 1841, Britain is going to occupy several coastal cities and force China to surrender. So Britain is actually going to win this First Opium War pretty successfully, and this is going to lead us to a treaty that ends this First Opium War. Okay, and so this treaty is called the Treaty of Nanking. 1842 ends the First Opium War, and the sessions to this are going to be that China has to give Hong Kong to Britain. It's supposed to be forever, but we're going to see a little bit of like sentimentality. In 1997, the British will give Hong Kong back. This treaty is also going to allow the British to get treaty ports, 4 of them, which will open to British trade, including Canton and Shanghai. So it's going to force the Chinese to buy British stuff. Also, British residents under this treaty, British who are living in China, and European visitors from Britain will be granted extraterritoriality. This means that they will be immune from Chinese law and that they only have to follow British law while in China. So you can probably guess, how well received this treaty is going to be. And so it definitely does not resolve the problems, and that's going to lead us into, because I gave you spoiler alert, a second opium war. So the Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, is going to have like the same start. It's going to be, over the British selling opium in China. But the people within China are also going to rebel during this war. We're going to see the Manchu, which is the ruling family right now, but also the minority in China versus the Han. And so China will also not be successful in this Second Opium War. They're going to be forced to open 6 more ports. So 4 plus 6, that's 10 ports now, to British and French trade indefinitely, and China will also be forced to accept trade and investment on unfavorable terms for the foreseeable future. So if you thought things were bad after the First Opium War for the Chinese, the Second Opium War is only going to compound these problems. And so the Second Opium War had stirred up all of these rebels within the country of China, and so this is going to lead us straight into the Taiping Rebellion of 1850. And so the primary cause of this rebellion within China is going to be differing Chinese factions. It's going to be these rebels that were stirred up in the Second Opium War opposing the Manchus, who are the ruling class, but as I said, the minority in China. And so the leader of these rebels he's been exposed to Western ideas, which is just what the Chinese were afraid of, and he's read the Bible, and he's actually going to say, hey, I've traced my family back, and I am actually the brother of Jesus, and I am here to free the people of China. And so he is going to lead a rebellion, and this is going to be really staggering death count. We're going to see 20 million people within China perish, and the Manchus are going to be able to defeat this rebellion even though they're minority, but it's going to take them 14 years, which is why so many people die, and they're only able to do it because of the help of the British military. So if their goal is to keep the Western ideas in Britain out, they're actually going to have to turn to them for help in the Taiping Rebellion to put down their own people. And so the result of all of this is that China is going to start to be carved up just like Africa. By the late 19th century, much of eastern China will become subject to domination by Britain, France, Russia, Japan, and Germany. Japan is going to gain Taiwan, also as a result of the Sino, which again, Sino means China, and Japanese War. So Chinese versus Japanese now of 1894 to 1895. And so this conflict with Japan, the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 and 1895, is going to reveal, it's going to, very clearly paint the picture of China's helplessness. And it is going to trigger, because if, someone's down, you're most likely going to kick them while they're down. It is going to trigger a rush for foreign concessions and protectorates in China. So we're going to see that Britain, France, Germany, and Russia and Japan are each going to come to control a piece of eastern China, which is called the spheres of influence, because they are there having an influence on these parts of China. We'll see Britain gain trade monopoly. We'll see France gain a lease on Canton Bay. Russia's going to control northern Manchuria, seeking a railroad, because remember, they're all railroading it up right now. Germany's going to gain a 99-year lease on the port of Qingdao, and concessions to build 2 railroad lines. You might notice, the U.S. has left off this list. If you might remember from this time period in U.S. history, we are focusing our own energy right now on manifest destiny, not so much imperialism. We're like, hey, what about that California right there? And so the U.S. is going to demand different policy because they don't want to be left behind in this. We're still growing as a world power, but they're going to, like I said, we're going to have our energies focused on just spreading across the continent and in building our own boundaries. And so the U.S. is going to do something a little bit different with the spheres of influence in China. Oh, and so I forgot, before we move to the U.S., I have this cool visual to show like what the spheres of influence look like. So like carving up the Chinese melon, as it would be called, carving it into spheres of influence. So Russia, Germany, Britain, France, and then the U.S. Where's my slice? So they don't want to be left out of the pie, of the cutting up. And so the U.S. is going to demand what is known as open door policy. And so the U.S. demands an open door. So why it's called the open door policy to trade. So like just leave it open, no closed door to trade in China, resulting in an agreement that the imperialist powers in China would not interfere in any treaty, port, or the interest of another power. And so this is just the U.S.'s way of saying, hey, we don't want to be left out of this. We just want to be accessible to the trade since you're getting to carve everything up. And really, it's kind of ironic. They could have said no and kept us out, but they don't. And I think what that is just wanting to still keep, those ties with some of the raw resources we have. But this is going to play a part later, this open door policy the United States has with China. But we're not going to get to that now. Now we need to turn to, as I think I've said like 5 times in this lecture, the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. So back to Britain and another part of the world that they are going to continue to imperialize. And so India is the jewel or the best thing of the British Empire. The Mughal Empire, controlled by the Muslims, had fallen apart in the 17th century. And so then after the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763 that we studied, the British East India Company is actually going to come in and be given control of India and be directly accountable to Parliament. So it's not exactly the British government that comes in, it's a company that comes in and takes over India. And we're not really going to talk about military Clive. Robert Clive here, we won't stop, but you can read about him in your notes. There's going to be some problems because since it's a company and not the British actually holding India, we're going to see that there's not enough employees to control India. And part of that Berlin conference is that you need to be able to hold the area. So the British East India Company is going to have to hire Indian soldiers, and they're going to be called sepoys, Sepoys. And that is going to lead us into the challenge that the East India Company is going to face in India, is these Indian soldiers who are their employees, helping them run things. And so one of the first problems that the East India Company faces with these Indian soldiers is that they're trying to convert them. Remember that one of the 4 reasons for imperialization is spreading Christianity. And so, what are the religions that are in India? We have Muslim, we have Hindu primarily. And so they're going to start being like, you're going to hell if you don't convert. You need to be this religion, and they're trying to spread this. And what's going to happen is, in trying to do this, they're going to start to outlaw some practices of the Hindus that are going to anger these sepoys or anger the Indian population. And so one of these things that they're going to outlaw is the practice of sati, which is where you have a funeral pyre for burial in the Hindu religion, and the widow would then customarily throw herself on the funeral pyre. And Burma, is that not love or what? I don't know. But so the English, this isn't part of their culture. They frown upon it, and they're going to outlaw it. And then they're also going to outlaw child marriage. And so the Hindus are like, hey, wait a second, this is isn't yours to control. This is going to anger them. What happens if you don't follow the rules of your religion? I'm going to be shunned by my family. And so there's going to be an insurrection of Hindu and Muslim soldiers in the British Army spread in northern and central India before it will finally be crushed, primarily by loyal native troops from southern India, who aren't as apt to rebel because they're, like we said, sometimes to live under imperialism is going to increase for some of those higher ups their living standards. So it's this first revolt easily put down, called the Sepoy Mutiny, 1857 to 1858. But we're actually going to have this continued angst against the British taking direct control of Indian states. And so this is going to be further spurred on by like a very short-term cause, and kind of one you wouldn't think would cause this much trouble, but actually the practice of the weapons that the Indian sepoys are given. And so other than the outlawing of practices, the mutiny is going to be caused by the use of these new British guns called the Enfield rifle. So instead they're using like mini balls that spin as they come out. But anyway, if you see like in movies, you can see like the cartridge here, like if you see like it's really dramatic, they like bite it open and then put it into the gun. These cartridges have animal fat on them to help grease the rifle. And if remembering from your world studies of the Hindu and Muslim religion, animal fat such as from a cow or a pig, that would be sacrilegious to a Muslim and Hindu. So they're thinking like, you're doing this on purpose. Like every time you're making us fight for you, we're having to bite into this animal fat, and that's sacrilegious, and we'll be shunned by our family. And so that's like we say like the short-term little cause. Really the big cause is you're imposing your culture on us. You're imposing your values on us, and they resent this. And so the Sepoy Mutiny is a combination of all of these things: resentment, the guns, the outlawing of cultural traditions. And so we're going to see, as a result, the ownership is going to transfer from the British East India Company to the British Parliament. And so the overall result of the Sepoy Mutiny is going to be, it's pretty easily put down, but after 1858, India will be ruled by the British Parliament instead of the British East India Company. It'll be ruled by the British Parliament in London and administered by a tiny all-white civil service in India. And so they're going to realize, very quickly that having your employees be from that native country and then trying to impose your culture on them, not such a good idea. But they are going to start some reforms in India after this time period, after the mutiny. Okay, so now that the British Parliament holds India, they're going to enforce some reforms. They're going to give a modern system of progressive secondary education to train Indian civil servants. Remember, there's a caste system, and so this is really going to primarily only benefit your uppers in India. We're going to see economic development such as irrigation projects, railroads, 25,000 miles being built by 1900. The cotton industry will become the fourth largest in the world, which is one of the reasons it's the jewel in the British crown. We're going to see the tea trade, the development of jute plantations, the creation of a unified and powerful state, and then we'll be given the Indian National Congress, formed in 1885 with its purpose for the British to train Indians to run India along British lines. So this is going to, and we're not going to talk much about here, we'll mention Gandhi a little bit later, but this will lead to some independence movements. Like you're going to have us run things, we don't want to run them under you. So we'll mention Gandhi a little bit later. Like I said, educated Indians, predominantly Hindu, will increasingly demand more equality and self-government. They've been in the upper echelon of the caste system, and so you've exposed them, you've taught them the English ideas. What's part of those? Like the Enlightenment, and like how come we can't be free too? And so I don't know, kind of like, if you don't want them to do this, don't teach them, don't westernize them. But we're going to see independence movements come out of this. But India will become independent in 1946, just after World War II, so we're getting there. But this is going to actually, this transfer, even though not appreciated, is going to bring India into like kind of up and coming because of the English. So they're going to set them up to become this, very fast growing nation, and wanting their independence from Britain. So Britain kind of set them up to be ready to do this. not in great detail, but some other British colonies in Asia. We're going to see Burma in the 1820s, the Malay Peninsula, which will be Malaysia, North Borneo, which is going to be Indonesia, and then we're going to move to, as we always go in order, into France and what they're doing in Asia. So back in France, we get Mr. Jules Ferry again, who had helped with the Conference of Berlin. And so we're going to see Indochina, which is modern-day Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, become protectorates of France in 1880s and 1890s. And in the South Seas, France is going to take Tahiti and New Caledonia, and also certain Pacific islands. Germany will also take certain Pacific islands, and they'll control the Marshall Islands and Samoa and the South Pacific. And so then what's going on with us? So United States has been fighting the Spanish-American War in 1898, trying to free Cuba, and the U.S. will defeat Spain and is going to end up taking the Philippines until 1946, Guam, Hawaii, and Cuba, and also Puerto Rico. At this time period, so we're not being left out here in Asia. And then, of course, we have the spheres of influence as well. So what's going on with the United States and some territories that we're still holding today. And so now that we've talked about all of this Western imperialism in Asia, what were the reactions to it? And we've already talked about some very unfavorable reactions. And so we need to kind of wrap up by talking about a couple more in China. So the Boxer Rebellion of 1900 is going to be a patriotic, nationalistic uprising by the Chinese nationalists against Western domination. Remember, they are not happy about this Western influence coming in. Why they're called the Boxer Rebellion is because the people are going to say they look like boxers. Like if you've ever seen Tai Chi, like this is the kind of fighting they're doing, and so that's why they call it the Boxer Rebellion. But these patriotic nationalists are going to be defeated by a multinational force of imperial powers in 1900. And so this push by the Boxers to get rid of white people is going to be defeated. But the Manchu dynasty, although it holds here, is going to soon fall as we're moving forward to World War I. And one of the reasons that this Manchu dynasty is going to fall is we have a nationalistic revolutionary leader named Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who is seeking to overthrow the Manchu dynasty and establish a republic in China. And this is going to spark the beginning of a Chinese nationalist movement, which in 1911 will be successful prior to World War I in overthrowing the Manchu dynasty. And then eventually this is going to lead us towards communism coming in 1949. Okay, so we've talked about Africa, we've talked about Asia, but we've only talked in passing about Japan. And so we're going to focus in on Japan for just a minute to the end of this lecture. So Japan is going to be our only Asian country not to be taken over by European countries, by European imperialists. But we will have Commodore Matthew Perry from the United States who will come in on ships and force Japan to open trade. In 1853, he uses the threat of war with Japan to get this done. Because he'll say, unless you do this, we'll open fire on Tokyo. And so this is in 1853. But unlike China, Japan is going to take this opportunity to quickly modernize and become an imperial power by the late 19th century. They're the only major Asian power to resist being swallowed up by imperialists, and it's going to help them come out of feudalism. So they're going to very smartly realize that they need that modernization to keep up, and to have some of these ideals coming in would be the best thing to do. And so this is what's going to be called as the Meiji Restoration of 1867. So this is a time period, if you've ever seen the movie The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise, so that's that transition time period of Japan trying to shake off feudalism and move into a more modern, westernized world. And so the Meiji Restoration is going to result in a series of reforms to compete with the West, just like Russia did. So they very smartly kind of accept these Western ideals and keeping and allowing them in to help them modernize and improve. And so that's going to bring us back to the Russo-Japanese War, so the war between Russia and the Japanese that we talked about in 1904. So talked about, I think, twice already this unit, but just to bring it into context with Japan right now. And so if you'll remember, the Russians had kind of turned eastward and been like, uh-oh, I don't like what those Japanese are doing. And on the same side, the Japanese are not happy with how close the Russians are getting with their railroad to Manchuria and Korea. And so the Japanese, being concerned about Russian Trans-Siberian Railway across Manchuria, this is going to lead us into the Russo-Japanese War. Remember, the Russians have been very social Darwinist and racist and said, there's no way we could lose to these Asians. But the Japanese, so we already know who wins, spoiler, Japanese are going to destroy the Russian fleet off the coast of Korea and won major battles on land too, so not just Navy. Although Russians turn the tide on land subsequently, we'll see that the Russians are going to be able to push them back, but at this time in 1904, Japan being very successful. And this is going to horrify Westerners who have just watched Japan beat a major Western power. And so this is going to put Japan on the radar. Whether good or bad as we move forward, you shall see. And so what we haven't talked about with this with the Russo-Japanese War is the treaty that ended, and it's called the Treaty of Portsmouth, and it is actually named after a city in New Hampshire because it's mediated by the United States and President Theodore Roosevelt, and it will end the war with Japan, winning major concessions for Japan: a preferred position in Manchuria, a protectorate in Korea, and half of the Sakhalin Island. And so a very nice treaty for Japan, who's kind of just shocked the Western world. Okay, so long-term impacts of the Russo-Japanese War, which we also have not talked about. Russia is going to turn to the Balkans, and so they're going to divert their attention west. Remember, Balkans is our powder keg, so they're turning their attention there. That's going to lead us up to World War I and Unit 9, which is our next unit when we come back from spring break. We're going to see the Russian Revolution come out. Remember, we're not doing so good. We Russians cry you more. Russo-Japanese War, so people within the country are going to, start to revolt. Japan will eventually annex Korea, and the revolt of Asia in the 20th century is a reaction of the Asians hoping to emulate Japan power and win their own independence and their own successes. And so with all of this pro-imperialism, I do need to throw this last little section in there for you. The opponents of imperialism. Not everyone, although this lecture has been all about it, was for imperialism. And so our first anti-imperialist we're going to see is Karl Marx, actually, with his book Das Kapital, which is a huge, look at that book, could kill you if it fell on you off a shelf. It is way bigger than the Communist Manifesto, published in 1867. Of course, we know that he died in 1863, so this will be released after. But this book is going to claim that the bourgeoisie needed constantly expanding markets to increase profits, and this would lead to conquest. And so he's going to say that imperialism is actually hyper-capitalism, and so going to be opposed to that, into communism, that the workers should be focused on rising up and overthrowing and then finally having this communist utopia. But the biggest name we need to talk about in anti-imperialism and that you need to know is J.A. Hobson. J.A. Hobson is the most prominent of the anti-imperialism theorists. He stated that imperialist powers needed colonies in order to provide new markets for domestic European goods. He claimed that businessmen and bankers unduly influenced governments' imperialistic policies, and thus imperialism benefited only the wealthy. So it's kind of, that strategy of this is still only benefiting those haves, not the have-nots. And he believed that if European governments forced businesses to raise wages for workers, this would result in increased consumption of goods and less of a need for new markets abroad. So just focus it at home. Focus on the workers. And so anti-imperialism is going to increase in Europe as a result of Hobson's work and others, but namely his. You need to know his name is associated with anti-imperialism. Socialists are going to accept Hobson's link of capitalism with imperialism, and Lenin of Russia is going to see imperialism as leading to colonial rivalries and war, such as the cases we're seeing moving toward World War I. So please don't forget to watch the review video of this. We will still have about 40-45 minutes for you to review and get everything together. Remember, only 30 questions, only 5 questions from Unit 8.3, and you'll be taking your writing with you. So this is more of a quiz than an exam. If you have any questions, please Emoto me.